I banned my toxic stepmom from my wedding, so my dad said he wouldn't come either. So I cut them both off. I'm 25, and I'm about to marry my high school sweetheart. His name's Caleb, also 25, and we just recently sent out the invitations for our wedding. When it came to the guest list, we agreed that I'd only invite my parents, but not my stepmother. That choice came real easy for me, honestly. She's just a horrible person, and the last thing I want is for her to show up and ruin one of the biggest days of my life. We'll call her January. She's 47 now and married my dad when I was in 8th grade. My parents split up when I was still a toddler, so I never really knew them as a couple. They had shared custody, and I spent half the month at dad's place and the other half with my mom. It actually worked out really well. I got to enjoy both homes, and for a while, life felt balanced. Over the years, both of them dated here and there, but it was always short-term stuff, nothing serious enough for me to get invested in. Things stayed that way for a while until my dad started seeing January. They began dating when I was in 6th grade, and when he first introduced us, she seemed nice enough. I actually liked her at first. But it didn't take long for that mask to slip. The longer she was around, the more she made me feel like a burden, like she couldn't stand to have me in the room. And look, I get it, some adults just don't like kids. But that doesn't give anyone the right to treat a child like they're unwanted. Eventually, I got so nervous around her that I avoided her altogether. She'd yell at me out of nowhere, and it happened so often that I started expecting it. So I stopped trying to talk to her or get to know her. In the beginning, she'd just give me dirty looks or act annoyed whenever I walked into the room. I tried to make myself as invisible as possible, quiet, low maintenance, easy to ignore. But once she got engaged to my dad, things took a turn for the worse. She started actively going out of her way to pick on me. At first, she kept it low-key, making sure dad didn't see it. But after they got married, she didn't bother hiding it anymore. She made my life at home absolutely miserable. And the worst part? My dad never once stepped in to defend me. It was like Jan saw me as some kind of rival, like we were competing for his attention or something. I know how strange and messed up that sounds, but it's the truth. She acted like I was a threat to her place in his life, and I could feel that hostility every single day. She constantly tore me down, especially about how I looked. But that wasn't the end of it. She also talked trash about my mom, mean, nasty stuff that made my blood boil. I'd talk back when I couldn't take it anymore, but that always backfired. My dad would scold me instead of her, and she'd get off scot-free. I tried to explain to him what was happening, more than once. But he was so wrapped up in her that it was like talking to a brick wall. He always acted like I was being dramatic or difficult. His favorite line was that I mattered to him, but so did she, and I needed to learn how to get along with her. He'd tell me that Jan only got irritated because I tried too hard, and that she didn't mean to insult me, she was just concerned. But I wasn't stupid. I knew he was just trying to convince himself that he hadn't married a monster. At the time, I didn't realize it, but looking back, I can see that my dad had always been selfish when it came to me. Still, back then, having a good relationship with him really mattered to me. I wanted him in my life, so I was willing to put up with Jan even though living with her was absolute hell. I let her walk all over me and destroy my self-worth because I thought, maybe if I just kept the peace, my dad would be proud of me. I just wanted what every kid wants, a normal family where both parents love you the same. So I stayed silent and stuck it out, hoping things would get better eventually. I never told my mom what was going on because I was terrified that if she found out, she'd go to court for full custody, and that would be the end of me seeing my dad. After a while, I even stopped bringing Jan up to him because I was scared he might walk away from our relationship entirely, or worse, let Jan talk him into giving up custody. The only strategy one had was to stay out of Jan's way, never set her off, and walk on eggshells whenever I was at my dad's. Honestly, growing up in that house was anything but easy. But somehow, I survived it. I still kept in touch with my dad even after I moved out. Maybe that makes me sound naive, but I was deeply attached to both my parents. The thought of not having either of them in my life crushed me. So I kept putting up with Jan's crap. She bullied me all through high school, and my mental health hit rock bottom. I turned into this super quiet, anxious kid, nothing like who I used to be before she came along and flipped everything upside down. I faked being okay, kept my head down, and just counted the days until I could go off to college and finally breathe again. And when that day came, when I finally packed up and left for college, I can't even tell you how happy I was. Nothing compared to the relief I felt. The best part? My school was out of state, so I didn't have to come back home much, just for holidays. I figured I'd spend the big ones with my mom and still check in with my dad just enough to keep the relationship going without stirring up any drama. It was a tightrope act, but I managed. Even after college, once I got a job and moved forward in life, I tried to keep that balancing act going as staying connected to my dad while tolerating Jan, who somehow only got nastier as time went on. She was downright mean most of the time, going out of her way to poke at me or get a reaction. But I refused to give her that satisfaction, and I think that only made her worse. One day, I dropped by to have lunch with my dad, and sure enough, Jan was right back at it, picking at me like always. That day, I completely lost it. Jan pushed me too far, and we ended up in a full-blown, nasty argument. That was about 3 years ago. After that blow-up, my dad only invited me over when he knew Jan wouldn't be around. I think that's when it finally sank in for him. Jan had always treated me horribly, and it wasn't something that was ever going to magically fix itself. But I also think he still wanted to have some kind of relationship with me since I'm his only child. So we started meeting elsewhere, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at his place when he was absolutely sure she'd be gone. It felt weird, yeah, but at the same time, it was a huge relief. I didn't have to keep pretending everything was fine while Jan hovered around, making snide comments or turning every little thing into some personal drama. She had this way of making everything about herself, especially when it came to me and our so-called issues, which, for the record, she completely made up. There was never a real reason for her to hate me. She just did. I honestly think she's one of those unhinged people who get a kick out of tormenting others, especially kids. Because if she truly saw me as a threat, she would have demanded my dad give up custody or cut me off entirely. But no, she kept me around, like some twisted hobby, just so she could torment me whenever the mood struck. Around that time, I met Caleb. We hit it off quickly, and after a few months of dating, I felt it was time for him to meet my parents. So I had them over for my birthday dinner at my apartment. Everyone got along pretty well, all things considered. Of course, Jan wasn't invited. We weren't speaking at that point, and honestly, I never felt the need to repair anything with her after everything she'd done. From that moment on, Jan remained completely out of the loop when it came to my relationship with Caleb. A couple months ago, he proposed, and we started planning the wedding. It never even crossed our minds that Jan might expect an invitation. After how she treated me for years, and considering we hadn't spoken in over 3 years, it didn't seem like something she'd even want to be a part of. Besides, Caleb and I were planning a small, intimate ceremony. We weren't letting guests bring plus ones, so it was crystal clear who was and wasn't on the guest list. Jan hadn't been invited to the engagement party either, and there's no way she didn't hear about that. Sure, I have her blocked on everything, but with all the photos and posts going around, I'm certain someone must have told her, probably my dad. So when he called to tell me that Jan was hurt and offended that she didn't get a wedding invite, I knew it was nonsense. She knew. She just wanted to stir up drama. If she had truly wanted to be part of my life or this wedding, she had plenty of time and chances to apologize. She never did. Not once. And without that apology, I didn't feel the slightest obligation to include her. Why should I? It makes zero sense. But somehow, my dad thinks I should invite her just because she's technically my stepmother. I told him straight up, I think that's ridiculous. She's not my family. Not in any way that matters. Still, he kept pushing it, and we ended up going back and forth about it for days. To me, inviting Jan would mean pretending everything she did never happened. It would mean giving her a place of honor on one of the most important days of my life, and she doesn't deserve that. Then yesterday, my dad dropped a bombshell. He said that if Jan wasn't invited, then he wouldn't be coming either. He told me it was disrespectful that his wife wouldn't be included in a major family event like this. I was stunned. He'd never tried to make things right between Jan and me after our fight, and now suddenly, he was drawing this line in the sand for her? I could understand Jan pulling this stunt. She lives for attention and drama, and what better time to cause a scene than right before the wedding? But I couldn't wrap my head around why my dad was enabling her, again. He had every opportunity to finally stand up and say, "You don't get to expect a wedding invite after the way you treated my daughter." But instead, he flipped it on me like I was the unreasonable one. He acted like I was the problem. Like I should be the one to bend. And that's when I knew, for sure, that nothing was going to change. After all this time, he still put Jan ahead of me. So I told him the truth. If that's how he feels, then maybe it's best he doesn't come either. I said I'd be rescinding his invitation, because after everything, neither he nor Jan deserved to be at my wedding. I told him point blank that he was just as bad as she was, maybe even worse. Jan bullied me throughout my entire childhood and teenage years, but he was the one who stood by and let it happen. He never defended me. Never once put his foot down. All because he was too much of a coward to stand up to his wife. And it was foolish of me to think he'd suddenly grow a spine now. So I told him not to come. Not to the wedding, and not into my life. I told him I was done. Then I hung up. After that, I sat down with Caleb and told him everything about the fight, about what my dad said, all of it. I just needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. That I'd done the right thing. Because deep down, I always hoped that someday my dad would finally see Jan for who she really is and take my side for once. But it's clear now that's never going to happen. He didn't even reach out afterward. Not a word. Not a text. But instead of hearing from my dad after our fight, I started getting messages from his relatives. They were calling me ungrateful, saying I needed to apologize to my father. And honestly, I don't see what's ungrateful about finally standing up for myself. All I did was tell the truth after years of convincing myself that maybe, deep down, my dad actually cared. Maybe he does, but clearly not enough to tell his wife to back off. His love for me has limits, and you know what? So does mine. I don't think it's unreasonable at all to exclude the woman who made my entire childhood miserable from one of the most important days of my life. I don't trust her, and I don't want her anywhere near me. The fact that she even expected an invitation is ridiculous. As far as I'm concerned, I'm being fair. My dad gave me an ultimatum, and I responded by cutting him off. That doesn't make me ungrateful, it makes me someone with boundaries. But to his side of the family, I'm the bad guy. They've been texting and even calling me to say how disappointed they are in me, that they thought I was better than this. And by better, what they really mean is they expected me to stay quiet and let my dad have his way, no matter how it made me feel. According to them, I should invite Jan simply because my father wants her there. They act like I owe him something because he raised me, helped pay for my education, and provided me with what they think was a nice childhood. But honestly, that's what parents are supposed to do. Plenty of people raise their kids and support them without expecting sainthood in return. Of course, I've always appreciated what my dad has done for me. But that doesn't mean he gets a free pass to control every part of my life now. And people forget I've made compromises for him too. I stayed quiet while he let Jan bully and belittle me for years. That wasn't some secret, everyone knew how she treated me. His whole family saw it. They just acted like it wasn't a big deal. It only becomes a problem when I finally push back. Thankfully, my mom and Caleb both think I'm being completely fair. But I still want an outside perspective, just to make sure I'm not losing my mind here. So yeah, I told my dad not to come to my wedding if he was going to insist on Jan being invited. That was my final word. Update 1. Hey, thank you so much for all the support I've received. Reading your comments really helped solidify my decision to cut my dad off. I didn't fully realize just how much I'd been tolerating over the years just to keep a relationship with him. And the saddest part? Even all of that wasn't enough for him. It hurts. He's my dad. I'm his only child. And still, he couldn't be bothered to care about how I was treated. That realization has hit me harder than I expected. Luckily, Caleb and my mom have been amazing. They've stood by me and helped me sort through all these emotions. I'm already under so much stress planning the wedding, and I really don't need my dad's family constantly messaging me and acting like he's some kind of hero just for doing the bare minimum a parent should do. Everything they bring up, feeding me, housing me, helping with school, those are things literally every responsible parent should do. That's not some grand sacrifice that makes him above criticism. But they still keep reaching out, trying to guilt me, like I'm supposed to just ignore everything he let Jan do. And honestly, I'm not replying to anyone at this point. These people watched me grow up. They knew exactly how Jan treated me. And yet here they are, still defending him like he was some saint. They're not texting me out of concern. They're doing it to preserve the illusion of who they want him to be. But I'm not budging. I said what I needed to say. Now it's up to him. Either he owns up to how he failed me, or he stays out of my life. And to be clear, I'm not even asking for the impossible. I never told him to leave Jan, even though honestly, that would have been more than justified given everything she put me through. All I've asked for is an apology. Just a real, genuine acknowledgement of what he allowed to happen. Apparently, that's asking too much. At this point, I get it. My dad's not interested in doing the right thing. He just wants to look like the good guy. He doesn't actually want to be one. For the longest time, I convinced myself that he was a decent person. That deep down, he really cared. But no father who truly loves his daughter would let anyone, let alone his wife, treat her like Jan treated me, and certainly not for years on end. So no, I'm not being ungrateful. I'm done pretending otherwise. Update 2. The wedding is getting closer now. It's been a month since I last spoke to my dad. His relatives stopped calling and texting after a few days, and honestly, they've completely cut me off. And I can't say I'm upset about it. If anything, I'm grateful. I've seen who they really are, and I'm glad they showed their true colors before the wedding. Of course, that doesn't mean the drama stopped. It just shifted. I've been so caught up in work and wedding prep lately that I almost forgot about the whole fight with my dad. Life's been hectic, and I've had my hands full. But then, just the other day, my dad showed up at my house. No call, no warning. just knocked on my door out of the blue. And I'll be honest, I was caught completely off guard. I let him in. I don't know if that makes me weak or just polite, but I've never been the kind of person who could turn someone away, especially not my father. Even if I'm upset or in the middle of a fight with them, I've never been able to turn my parents away. So when my dad showed up at my door, I let him in. I didn't know what he wanted, but for a split second, I actually thought he might apologize. Of course, that's not what happened. I mean, maybe you could call it an apology, but only in the weakest, most technical sense of the word. He made it clear right away that he still wasn't coming to the wedding, so whatever peace offering he was trying to make felt kind of pointless. He came over around noon and ended up staying for almost 3 hours. We had one of the longest, deepest talks we've ever had about our relationship and whether there was even anything left to salvage. We didn't come to any real conclusion, but I will say that the conversation was long overdue. For the first time, my dad actually admitted that Jan had been a bully. He confessed that back when I was growing up, he let a lot of things slide because he just didn't want to stir the pot with her. Hearing him finally admit that out loud, it was weirdly refreshing. I never thought he'd own up to it. Up until then, his only real tactic had been to gaslight me, convincing me that I was somehow the problem. And for years, I believed it, because it was my dad saying it. But as I got older, I started to understand that none of it had been my fault. Still, I never pushed back because I didn't want to lose him. I wanted that connection so badly, I was willing to let it slide. But this time, it was all laid out on the table. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was his moment to truly say he was sorry. But no. Instead, he told me that while he felt bad about what happened, he couldn't actually apologize because, in his words, it had been the only way he could maintain a peaceful life, one where he didn't have to constantly choose between Jan and me. I don't buy that, to be honest. He absolutely could have stepped in and tried to make things right between us. But he didn't. He stayed silent. He stayed out of it not because he had to, but because it was easier. Confronting Jan would have been hard. Shifting the blame onto me was easier. Kids are easier to manipulate. And he knew I wouldn't risk the relationship by standing up to him. He used that to his advantage, and he knows it. He admitted that he loved both of us and didn't want to lose either relationship, so he just avoided responsibility altogether. And yeah, he did a pretty good job of that. But let's be real, what kind of father lets his child get emotionally tormented just to keep the peace in his marriage? And no, he never actually said I'm sorry. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't count. He did say that he wanted to be part of my life again and suggested we consider going to therapy together, or at least make some effort to repair things. But in the same breath, he said he still couldn't attend the wedding unless Jan was invited because she was genuinely offended. Apparently, she had expected me to move on from everything she did. As if it were just something I should sweep under the rug. He told me Jan hadn't even known he was coming to visit me. She had been totally against it. According to him, she allowed him to keep in touch with me when I was a kid because she thought it was important for him to feel like a dad. But now that I'm a grown woman, she figured I could handle myself, and I didn't need to go running to daddy every time something went wrong. What kind of twisted logic is that? I can't believe he's still letting her pull the strings. We talked for hours, but in the end, we got nowhere. I honestly don't know what to expect from him anymore. I want to fix things, but I can't keep doing it alone. And I definitely can't keep being second to January. I just don't have it in me anymore. It's heartbreaking, and I don't even know what else to say. Update 3. Hi again, it's been a while since that last update, and I just wanted to share the good news. Caleb and I are married now. We had the wedding exactly the way we wanted it, surrounded by the people who truly care about us. It was small, beautiful, emotional, and full of love. Everything I'd hoped for. No, my dad wasn't there. And like many of you, I had held on to a tiny hope that he'd come to his senses at the last minute and show up, that he'd finally leave Jan and choose to be there for me. But that didn't happen. We're still not in contact. I know in my last update I mentioned that we were going to try therapy and work on rebuilding our relationship, but none of that ever really came together. After that conversation at my house, we stayed in touch for a couple of days, and then he just stopped responding. I kept reaching out, hoping to keep that momentum going, but he ghosted me. I had a lot on my plate with work and wedding planning, so I stopped texting after a while. He never reached out again. I later heard from a couple of family members, those few who still speak to me, that my dad and Jan had moved to the suburbs recently. I guess that's what he's been busy with. But if that's the case, I have no idea why he even came to visit me that day. Why bother making promises he clearly never planned to keep? Honestly, I'm okay. I'm disappointed, sure, but I've been disappointed by him so many times before that I've learned how to live with it. What I won't do anymore is give him another chance to hurt me. Right now, I'm focused on the relationships that actually matter. The ones that bring me peace and joy, like the one I have with my husband, and with my mom. Caleb and I are heading off on our honeymoon in a few days, and that's where my attention is going.